Mr. Speaker.
I call Adrian Rurapi.
Tēnā koe e te māngai o te whare o te rā, tēnā tātou katoa. Sir, I want to, and it's a great pleasure to stand to speak to the births, deaths, marriages and relationship registration, preventing name change by child sex offenders amendment bill. Sir, I want to acknowledge the promoter of the bill, first of all, for the purposes that he has set out, which are very admirable. But sir, the question that I have to ask myself is whether or not this bill is able to deliver on the purposes set out by the member. Sir, from my perspective, also that we have to ask ourselves whether or not there is any value in sending this bill to a select committee for further consideration. I can report, sir, that we have on this side of the House looked very carefully at this bill. And there are some very concerning things about the way it is drafted. Things that we have to ask ourselves whether or not we can indeed support this bill to go to select committee. And it's our assessment that actually this bill needs to go back to the drafting table to be completely rewritten, and that it would be a waste of the select committee's time to spend time on this bill. And I'll set out the reasons why. We don't think that it meets the standard required for any bill to be considered by a select committee. And I point first of all to the report of the Attorney General under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act applied to this bill. And there are some very concerning things that the Attorney General has stated in his report. The very first one is he has said that he has concluded the bill limits the right to freedom of expression affirmed in section 14 of the Bill of Rights Act, and that limit cannot be justified under section 5 of that act. That alone, sir, would indicate to me that there's a very high threshold for this bill to make it over on that particular part of that report. But sir, it actually goes on, and there are many under each and every part of this report. The Attorney General states his concern about it and uses language like it would not meet that or merely meets it, or words to that effect, sir. One of the areas that drew my attention was where he states that, and I'll read the exact words, further, an exception could be allowed in cases where prohibition would be manifestly unjust. Of course, within this bill, sir, there are no provisions for an exception to what has been proposed. And I got thinking about what kind of exception might there be. And over my time, sir, working with my community, with my hapu and iwi, on a number of occasions I've had the situation where a person has been, for want of a better word, fostered out of their family into another family and has assumed the name of that family. They've gotten themselves into a little bit of trouble and come back home to their hapu and iwi and have wanted to reconnect with their whānau, and through that reconnection has played a very important part in their rehabilitation. And part of that, in at least two situations that I know, is to reclaim their Māori whānau name. This, from my perspective, my view of the world, if it were to be prevented in a situation like that, then not only would it be contrary to the New Zealand Bill of Rights, it would also be a breach of that person's Treaty of Waitangi rights. I think it's really important that this House, it's not good enough for us to stand in this House and talk about settlement of claims, and that we make really wonderful speeches about how we are going to create a better society for our iwi and hapu through these settlements, and then we bring in legislation that potentially impacts on our treaty rights. That's just not right. And I stand here to say that this is a really important thing for me to address in this House. In saying that, I can well imagine that some people will say, well, you know, what will be the solution? I think there, as this, the Attorney General's report points out quite clearly, that there are other measures already in place, and there are measures which I have to acknowledge that the government is currently pursuing through legislation, which would adequately take care of the situation that this bill purports to be able to deliver on. And I think that's, that it's unfortunate in one sense that we have to, that I'm having to address this bill in this way, but we have to be true to, one, in particular, the Bill of Rights, and two, the Treaty of Waitangi. And I asked the member, and I listened very carefully to his contribution. He did not once mention the Attorney General's report. I think that every single member of Parliament, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think everyone should actually read this report, because I think, in all seriousness, if we are to have the best legislation for this country to address an issue that has impacted on all communities in this country, but I want to in particular, because I know, and I'm not speaking because I've read something, I'm speaking because I have been part of my hapu and part of my iwi, and have actually had to deal with these issues, and they're really difficult issues to deal with. And I think from a value base that our hapu and iwi come from, this particular bill will impact quite negatively on them. I think that a better way forward would be to use, to look again at it and at this, these particular issues within this report, and as I say, come up with a better way forward. And yeah, I'm not convinced actually that there is any need for legislation to prevent people from changing their names. Surely the register that is being promoted currently would adequately deal with that issue. There is also, in relation to that, a number of other ways in which we can ensure that the safety of our children and young people are preserved. And so, Mr. Speaker, I stand here before the House and say that Labour will not be supporting this bill. We will be voting against this bill, not because of the purpose of the bill, because it just cannot deliver on the purpose of the bill. Nō reira, mihi kawana ki te whare tuake nei. O tino ki te mema e whakatū ana tēnei pire, aha ko taku kōrero ka mii ake ki ngā whakaro kei roto tēnei pire. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to go into te reo Māori when people are not making sense in English on the other side. So, nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora.